Okay, we're rolling. Red light, the camera is on. And we're still in Mark. I'll be in Mark. They put out the stuff, so Mark session, or 9, yeah, part 9. Look, if you want to go this way through Mark, it takes this long, sorry. I was thinking about doing Hebrews next. I don't know, we'll maybe have a vote on it or see if the pastors are happy with that. I don't know if it'll take, how long is Hebrews? 13. Okay, 13 chapters. No, I don't think it'll take that. Look, I'm way ahead of you guys. I'm already finished, but we just got to get through this stuff, right? You said you like going at this pace. I like this pace too, because that way I don't have to shortchange you. But whatever, however it goes, this is the way it is. And you seem to be happy. I told you before, you'll eventually get tired of the detail, but that's okay. This is fun for me because I learn a lot as well.
We could do Obadiah next.
Obadiah. That's a short one. Yeah. I don't profess to know much about Hebrew, but I try when we do it. Ruth was a lot of fun. That was really interesting, wasn't it? It's amazing what you find out when you actually go in and see what the words themselves say in their cultural context. Because that's what we've been doing, right? And I think you'll even be surprised today. But the word that I have for you, and it's not correct on the sheet. For some reason, I forgot to change the Greek. But that's okay. That's the previous word of the day. But storio, this is a word that means specifically is translated to crucify. But it means a stake or a post. And the reason this word, and I think I mentioned this to you before, the reason this word became to mean to crucify on a cross is it's a Greek word that means to impale. Look, I won't draw a picture. People, this is horrific, but they still do this in the Muslim world, the Islamic world, they still impale people, mostly for homosexuality. But it's a horrific way to die. It takes hours and hours to die when you're impaled, and there's no survival at all. A person on a cross might be able to get off and survive eventually before they're totally dead. But a person who's impaled, they're dead. That's the end of it. Once it starts, that's all she wrote. And the Greeks had a word for it because they did it. You only have words in your language because you do it, or you borrow words, right? If you don't have a word in your language and you start to do it or start to use it, then you borrow words from other languages. That's what we do in English. That's what, well, look, tsunami, kimono, right? Those are Greek words. No, they're Japanese words. We borrow words because we need the words. Other languages do the same, and if you notice, and we will see some really interesting Greek words that have been applied to the Roman world. This word is a Greek word that, who knows, it was borrowed. It looks like an original Greek word. Like I said, most early cultures usually punished homosexuality through impalement, which is a gross thing anyway, but that's what they did. The Islamic world still does it. So storio, which means to impale on a stake, is the word that became crucify in the Greek for what the Romans did. The Romans, I don't know, maybe somebody else knows of other cultures that crucified. As far as we know in history, the Romans are one of the few cultures that crucified people. I'm not sure why they would become part of their culture or part of their way of executing people.
Didn't they borrow it from the Carthaginians?
I don't know. I've not heard that before.
I thought it was Carthage that did it.
Possible. Now you mentioned it,
Carthaginians were into that too?
Very possible.
Well, the thing about this method of killing people is number one, it fits well with roads. And the Romans were the only, remember, I told you this before, although not this specific class. Remember, everybody built roads, but why did the ancients build roads?
Get their armies.
Actually not.
Commerce?
No, not commerce. The ancients built roads to get to the temple. They had no other purpose than getting to the temple. And the temples wanted roads. And as a matter of fact, you'll find, for example, in Japanese culture, one of the biggest things they do is they take the kami, they carry the kami from the temple down the streets. And to do that, you need a road. And usually the roads, for example, Japanese roads, are extensions of the temple courtyard. That usually goes down a set of steps, a long set of steps, to another natural road, a real commerce road. And that's what the Greeks did. The Romans were unique because the Romans built roads for the purpose of moving their armies and commerce, which was odd because other societies said, well, why do you need a road? Right? Other cultures didn't build roads. They just allowed the commerce to take place. And guess what happened? They built roads. Well, it's kind of like, you know, in the countryside, right? People don't have roads. What happens?
Ruts.
Yeah, they build ruts into a path and it becomes natural. And by the way, you know the old dictum, right? The ruts in the path come from the chariots, which come from, the Romans built their roads to fit chariots, which to fit the iron chariot railroads are based on chariot ruts. And by the way, they're different from the Russians build differently. The narrow gauge in Europe is based on chariot ruts. The wider gauge in the Soviet Union, I don't know what it's based on, but it's so that the Europeans can't use their railroads and vice versa. There are lots of really deep things in just commerce. But the Romans were the ones who built roads for commerce. And the big deal about roads and commerce and executions is, where do you want to put your executions?
Everybody can see it.
Where everybody can see it, exactly. And so if I put it along a road and the guy is gasping out his life for 24 hours on a cross, that is a pretty good incentive not to do wrong. And so why the Romans developed, I don't know if they got it from the Carthaginians. Carthaginians weren't really road builders. You have to look for road builders. Crucifixion kind of goes with that. And by the way, they didn't gallows people on the roadways. Where did they gallows people in, for example, Western history? Town Square, and where else? Where roads came together. Gallows Oak. You know, like an area where two roads came, like for example, highwaymen especially were put on a gallows, usually at a place where the king's highways came together. Just saying. So very interesting. I mean, execution and roads go together. So at least in the ancient world. Today, we don't execute anybody, even when they do the most heinous things possible. Yes, sir.
Just out of curiosity, I'm not familiar with Golgotha, but where Jesus was executed, but is that near a road?
Ah, yes. That's a beautiful question. On the picture I gave you, does it have Golgotha? Yeah, it doesn't. It's not very good. That is not where Golgotha probably is. That is not a very good... the main gate into Jerusalem, I'm sorry to give you a bad picture. I should give you a better one. But that one just popped up and it was pretty cool because it had lots of good stuff on it. But if you look at the city of Jerusalem, it's, I used to be able to draw it right, but I'm not going to draw it exactly the way it should be. It looks like the letter that means God, J. And as a matter of fact, it's supposed to represent that. That's what Jerusalem, not the J Jerusalem, but Jehovah. So the main gate to Jerusalem is right about here in the corner, and I think that's shown up there. And then there's the temple is about here, and the fortress of Anatolia is here, and the fish gate is here that goes out. And then there's there's a couple of gates here. There's one, this is the city of David, the old city of David. And this is Gehinnom, and this is the this is the one that's at the base of the Mount of Olives. Is it Mark? Kidron, the Valley of Kidron, yep. And so, these are valleys. This is Gehenna. This is the refuse gate. And then this is the main gate. It's at right in the north part of the city, old city of David. And so, where Golgotha probably was is right here. This is where the Romans liked to put the bodies, put up their crosses. And if you read Centurion, this is when Abinadar comes with his mentor and his leader, the new head of the legion in Jerusalem. This is where they see all the crosses along this road. And by the way, they kept it away from the city a little bit because it's stinky. It's nasty. And so they put it out where everyone coming into the city, and by the way, this is the main commercial gate. This is not the main commercial gate, in spite of the fact that everybody seems to be going and coming from that gate. This is the fish gate, Why would the fish gate be called the fish gate if it's the main commercial gate? Why do you think they call it the fish gate?
Don't know, it goes the opposite direction from the,
From the sea. What do you get there, though? If you go in and around here, where do you get to? Jericho. And where is Jericho? Jericho is just outside of the Jordan River Valley. And the Jordan River Valley is where you get fish. And so the fish gate, I don't know, maybe there's some guy trucking the sushi up, every day, right, from the Jordan River and goes through the fish gate. But that may be the reason it's called the fish gate. But in any case, this is where they would usually put people up. And this is more of an agricultural kind of backwoods kind of thing. Nobody wanted to go down to Jericho. Well, you know why, right? The Good Samaritan? Get whacked on the way of the road to Jericho? This is not a very positive thing. So you always have, remember, that's why, remember, if you've read Centurion, Ruth, the live-in with the centurion, asks him to take her to see John the Baptist. And they go down to Jericho, but his officer will not allow him to go without a guard for that reason, because this is not a safe means of travel through the mountains. So in any case, that's just a basic. So we are at 12, we are at 15, and I backed up to 12. 12, what shall I do then with the one you call the King of the Jews? Pilate legoed them. This is the third specific declaration with no disagreement that Jesus is the son of the King of the Jews. In 13, staru, crucify, impale him on a stake, they screamed. In 14, why? What? Not crime. What kekos? Kekos is, we've seen this word before. Kekos is very interesting. Kekos is not a crime. Kekos literally means worthless thing. Worthless thing. In other words, now, see, the Romans, the Greeks, did not put people to death for being worthless. They put themselves to death in the ancient world for being worthless. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you die. So, in the ancient world, you didn't have to worry about the worthless being worthless. So, those who were really worthless were kekos. Kekos literally means worthless thing and is connected with criminal activity. However, like I said, they just can't put you to death for being a worthless thing. Why do you think Pilate says, why? What worthless thing has he committed? What is he doing? What is that?
He's trivializing what they have brought him.
Exactly. Precisely. That is precisely correct. It is a satire. This is Greek writing. Greek writing is full of paradox and satire, and this is pure satire. We miss it. It is so beautiful in the Greek. Can you see Pilate? They brought Jesus to Pilate. Pilate didn't want to kill him. Jesus hasn't done anything worthy of death under Roman law. And so Pilate's like, what worthless thing has this guy done? He's making fun of him. And like I said, we take, maybe the fact is that we take this too seriously. I mean, it's serious stuff, right? But when you trivialize something that is already serious, that's called bathos. When you take something that is extremely serious and you put an emotive context to it, that's called pathos. The Greeks are all into pathos. They were against bathos. Bathos is trivializing the critical, the important, where pathos is outlining it. And so the Greeks, with their humor, outlined and made something more, in Greek it's pathetic, okay? But it doesn't mean pathetic like we think, the initial meaning of pathetic. It means just filled with emotion. Yes, sir?
Just curiosity. We think of sarcasm as kind of a contemporary thing, but would there have been sarcasm in these writings according to the way the Greeks interpreted it?
Oh, yeah. And I've tried to point it out to you. I mean, the writings are full of sarcasm. Because, okay, we think it's a modern thing. I don't know what, look, we think that we are much smarter than the Greeks, right? At least our culture does. Because they were just doing philosophy about the atom. Look, half the people in our country can't outthink the dumbest Greek person that was ever born.
At least half.
At least half. The Greeks were a very highly intellectual society. As a matter of fact, they couldn't get together. You know how we get together and we talk about, what, football and food? The Greeks did not get together and talk about football and food. They did, you know, the Olympics might have been part of their conversation at least every year. You know, they did it every year, by the way, the Olympics. But you know what? They had two types of Olympics. Did you know that? The Greeks had two Olympics. They had one Olympic, which was the, you know, spears and pentathlons and running and all the other stuff. The other Olympic was the intellectual Olympics, where people did poetry and essays and plays. And it was all their Olympics were done for what reason?
For the gods.
For the gods. It's all religious. Everything. Every Greek play is a religious play. And by the way, half the Greek plays are comedies and half of them are tragedies. And they are filled with sarcasm. Anybody ever study the Greek plays? They are filled with paradox and amazing stuff. Very, very deep stuff. Okay, there's even a play that makes fun of Socrates. It's called The Clouds, and I have a partial translation in my book, The Second Mission. So, you know, and it's totally sarcastic. I mean, it's look, the Greeks were not. Read unexpurgated Greek, okay? The unexpurgated Greek will blow you away. It'll probably hurt your moral sensibilities just like it did the Romans. Just like I said, the Romans basically moralized all of Aesop's fables. Half of Aesop's fables are so R to X rated that you cannot let children read them, okay? And that's the reason the Romans didn't pass them on. And many of them don't have morals because the Romans couldn't get through them, because of their moral fortitude or whatever they were. The Greeks were very interesting as a people because unlike what you see about back rolls and, you know, the supposed craziness, hedonism, right, that went on, they were very restrained in their hedonism. Believe it or not. They're becoming like, well, they're not like our society where there is hedonism without any control. They had actually a controlled degree of hedonism. We would call it, well, half of our culture would not call it hedonism at all. They would call it normal. But they did do things that we would consider immoral within the fabric of our culture. But they were very controlled about it. In other words, they did not allow the two to mix together. Religion and their hedonist activities did not. They were very moralistic religiously, which is really odd. Even when they had a religious festival where you drank yourself to get drunk, including the children. They have children. The adult-sized containers for this drinking festival were about this big. The child-sized ones were this big. And we know from the writing that the children participated. So everybody in their culture got totally drunk on one specific holiday. And we say, well, that doesn't sound right. But to them, that was right. And I've also used that as an example of why the Christian culture took them by storm. Because the Christian culture said, come to the Baccharal, this festival. It was the Bacchus festival. And guess what? We will protect your children. We will look after your daughters and your sons. We will make sure that we have a protected environment. You know, they drank, but guess what they tried to do? They tried to change the society by interjecting themselves within the culture. And guess what the Greeks did? They lapped it up. They thought it was really cool. You know, you come to a Baccharal and you have babysitters. You have a Baccharal and you have somebody looking out for you so you don't die in your own puke. You know, these are really, you know, we laugh, but, you know, look at it. You know, Halloween used to be a Christian festival. And yet we let the world take it over, right? And now it's a demon festival. So why aren't we taking it back? That's what the early church did, is they took over the festivals. The secular is taking over our festivals, but that's a whole other thing. Anyway, why? 14, why? What Caicos, worthless thing has he committed? Legoed Pilate, but they shouted all the louder. They crazoed all the louder. Crucify him. So 15, wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to him. Okay, look, Read Centurion. I tried to put this within context of how he did this. Because releasing Barabbas. Okay, who was Barabbas?
Fake
In other words,
Messiah.
what's his name?
He was a fake Messiah, Bar Abba, son of the father. But was he a nice guy?
No.
This guy was a guy who was splitting the throats of the Jewish people because he couldn't get to the Romans. This is a bad dude. Can you see Pilate? You know, Pilate, this is beautiful Greek sarcasm. Because Pilate is now releasing to them a car brother.
Terrorist.
He's giving them a terrorist. He's giving them a Muhammad Atta. He's letting him go, you know, and you know what? He may even given him a knife. I can see Pilate, you know, here you go. Free of charge. You know,
Sued and
go have fun.
$100.
Right? I mean, this is so delicious. You know, the irony is delicious. Because Pilate is giving him back a murderer. A person who's murdered probably not Romans. If he'd murdered Romans, what would have been happening?
He'd already be dead.
He'd been dead, exactly. So he had to murder someone other than Romans, which means he was murdering Jewish folks in Judea. You know, I don't know, you can't make this up, right? I mean, look at how this is fitting within a historical context. And by the way, you know, it's what's funny about this is in English, like for example, in Centurion, I try to go into great detail for English readers to know what Pilate was thinking. Have Pilate talk to my character to make sure that everyone knew what he was doing about Barabbas. In other words, Pilate's laughing. Okay, give him Barabbas. Because he knew Barabbas was going to kill a bunch more. Right? Just saying. So wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus Thergeleo whipped. It says flogged. Now, there is a difference in the use in the other Gospels, but I want to be clear with this, because the words that Mark uses are very interesting, and we're going to see how interesting they are. Because the word used here does not imply the whip. If remember in Matthew, we looked at the word in Matthew. The word in Matthew specifically means the whip that the Romans used that had metal tips on it. Matter of fact, that word is used in Mark a couple of times. It is not used here. The word used here means whipped, and it is a Greek use. In other words, they don't imply that it's using a I think it's called stereotypes. It's the whip with the things on it. So in other words, it doesn't say, for example, he had him whipped 50 times or 100 times. It just says he had him whipped and handed him over to be crucified, impaled on a stake. Now, I told you this before, I'll mention it again. What was his name? The Gaius Flaccus was the Quaestionaris of the legion. At the time, we believe this is a guy who executed Christ. Because there was always a centurion in charge. The Quaestionaris was also a centurion. The Quaestionaris was in charge of torture. Well, in the ancient world did not see a difference between execution, punishment, and torture. As a matter of fact, what is the most famous symbol from Puritan America?
The stocks.
The stocks. The stocks are a means of punishment and torture. When you put a person out in the stocks, you put them in the stocks for a set period of time. They were not allowed to leave, eat. They use the restroom there. Okay? That's why they're always put above a thing, and usually there's like a hole or a pit kind of below it. People throw things at them. The way they generally eat, unless their family or someone's there to help them, like give them something, usually at night, the stuff that is thrown at them, rotty food, bad food, old stuff, eggs, that's their sustenance. In the ancient world, until, by the way, who invented the modern system of incarceration? You know, this is American history. This is like American History 101. The Quakers. Quakers invented modern incarceration because the Quakers believed that the punishment schemes of the Puritans and the punishment schemes at that time were not kind. And so our punishment schemes come basically from the Quakers. The Quakers believed it was better to incarcerate people for a time in punishment instead of the Puritan. By the way, it's not fair to call it the Puritan model. What model was it?
Medieval.
The British, I don't want to call it medieval. It's not really medieval. This is the modern method of taking care of criminals, was to immediately punish them. And the immediately punish them meant to hang them or draw and quarter them, by the way, that is medieval, to put them to death in some way that was fitting to the crime, by the way, in their worldview, or to immediately punish them. For example, put them in the stocks for a period of time, or to whip them or beat them. That was normative within those cultures. So, for example, commit a crime in Singapore, you will maybe be caned, right? Because, and by the way, it's up to your mind to think what is kinder. Is it kinder when a person like steals to make them pay back to the person they stole from and beat them and then let them go? Or is it kinder to incarcerate them for 5 years? And feed them and not have them pay back? I mean, it depends on what you believe. If you believe your justice is punishment and revenge-based, which, you know, that's, by the way, biblical. God's thing is revenge-based and punishment. Or you believe it's rehabilitative. The Quakers were rehabilitative. Now, I believe that a cane on your back might be rehabilitative to a certain degree, but that's my personal opinion, right? So I'm just saying, is it better to take 5 years away from someone's life or to cane them? You choose, all right? We as a society have chosen to take people's time away from them, which is maybe the most cruelest there is, right? But anyway, whatever. So they whipped him and handed him over to be crucified. And it was all because they asked. Now, look what happens in 16. The stratitontes, the legionnaires, and by the way, this word, if you notice a semblance between this word and the word before, remember the word for a rebel was one who holds in place, stands up against the government, basically. What do you think this word is? Basically, it means a person who holds the line, right? In other words, this word is the Greek inflection of what the Romans did. Okay, so in the Greek worldview, what were the Greek soldiers like? What were they called? You remember what they're called?
Immortals?
No, the Greek soldiers. The fighters, just the regular fighters. Hippolytes. 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 And a Hippolyte was a guy that had a long spear, and a short sword, maybe. But you had a long spear, short sword, and you had a big shield. And the Hippolytes, the point of the Hippolytes was the sword only came later. So just think Hippolytes, spear, and your shield. Now, what do you think, how do you think a Hippolyte fought?
Resting with the spear.
Actually, no.
Bury the spear in the ground and hold it out at an angle
Yes.
to accept a charge.
Fully defensive.
Yes. A Hippolyte worked like this. A Hippolyte was in and I'm not going to draw the whole formation. There's a huge formation of Hippolytes, like 100 guys, okay? 100 guys in one, square. It's called a Hippolyte square. They're in a square, and they're sticking they have theirs out in the ground, and these guys have theirs out in the ground, and these guys have theirs out, and they're really long. And guess what? When this guy falls, this guy moves up, and they keep the square. The problem with the square, though, is it can only be protected from one side. Well, It can be protected from other sides, but the problem is you got to have other groups beside you, right? And by the way, that's where the kafela, remember the head thing? Protecting of the head? Because the kafela, here's my shield, here's my head. Who's protecting my head? Guy on the right. The guy on the right is he's my shield warrior. He is guarding my kafela from attack from that side. Because I can guard the left side, but I can't guard the right side. And so that's where the idea of kafela, of head, in the Greek comes from. The head is a thing that sticks out from the hippolyte square. The head is a thing that a wrestler holds out as to temptation for the guy to grab, see, and attack. So this is the whole thing of the Hippolytes. Now, the Romans were different. Yes, sir?
And that's also why the right-hand man was so important.
Exactly. That's where the whole concept of the right-hand man, of my right-hand man, comes from. And it's a viticulture thing. Okay, we are, Anglo-Saxons are viticulture. Viticulture is both, vita means the word for both in German. The Greeks were a viticulture. In a viticulture, my shield warrior was my best buddy. And apart from what's here, it was not, homosexual was not a lover thing. It was that person was the most important person in my life. More important than my wife, more important than my children, more important than anyone in my whole life. The person that was your shield warrior. The Greeks did the same thing. It was huge in their Greek society. That's why all the Greek words for love that deal with like friendship and like what we would consider love are all male words for males. Phileo, for example. Phileo is the love, it said brotherly love, right? It's beta love. It's the love you have for your shield warrior. The only love terms that were applied to women were barely eros, which means romantic love in the Greek. The Greeks could actually have romantic love for other males and not necessarily be homosexual, but sometimes that's the way it worked. But they also had, what's the other one? The other big one. Well, not phileo, the other word for romantic love that could be, pathos. Pathos meant basically sexual desire, sexual love, which was only applied, by the way, to women, which is very interesting. It didn't apply to men. They applied eros to men and women. Yes, sir?
In that formation, totally understand the right-hand guy. What about the guy on the, I mean, the guy on your right side had to have a guy on his right side. So did the guy in the middle have two shield mates?
So where did you put your best warriors?
On the outside.
This is the way that you knew you were the best warrior. And by the way, in who is there? By the way,
That's what I'm asking.
Mon Capitan.
well, anybody been in the military before? You got no military good? The guy on that side is the guidon. And the guidon is, if you read centurion, you learn, here's the centurion, here's the optio, here's the tesarius. Usually the tesarius is here. And here is the guidon, and what's his name? He's called he's a guidon bearer, but it's a name in the Roman. Anyway, the way that it goes, this is number one. The centurion is number one. He's the officer. This is the number one under officer. He takes the place. The optio is like the sergeant major, head sergeant of the legion,
Century.
Of a century. And then this is 3. Number 3 is the guy carrying the guidon, carrying the flag,
Standard bearer.
the standard bearer. But there's another word for it. And the tesarius is 4. Look where the tesarius is. If he survives the battle, maybe they'll move up, right? These guys are put there for a reason, because these are the guys who are holding the place in all the battles. Now the legions marched like this, but they didn't fight like this. The legions fought like this, generally. They did not have long spears. They had 2 spears. One was for throwing and one was for setting. And then they had gladius. The reason the gladius, and these guys later on got gladius, why do you think you need a gladius? Why do you think you need a short sword?
Fight close.
When you get into close combat, guess what happens to your long spear?
Not really good.
Yeah, it's, you know, oh, I'm going to get you, right? No, you pull out your gladius. Well, these guys had gotten smart, and so they also had the ability, these guys do not have much iron, right? Until later. These guys started out with a lot of iron in the Iron Age. And so now with a lot of iron, you can build armor, you can build gladius, you can have your spears. They had two spears. One was for throwing, the other one was for setting. And they would usually set in a formation like this. And so therefore, unlike the Hippolyte, they were stratetios, which was stand in place. They stood in their line. And the legions usually fought in a line. You notice, you can't protect very well with your shield, brother. Guess what? Romans were not a beta culture. Romans were not a beta culture. This, we think that culturally, for example, languages and culture, huge things. And simple things like this. For example, did anybody ever teach you that Anglo-Saxons were a beta culture? Which is, if you're from England or Germany, England, Germany, Netherlands, Iceland, they're all beta cultures. This is really important stuff because guess what it does to our modern culture? Friendship. By the way, this is how Christianity has changed the beta cultures of all those cultures. Who do most women and men say their best friends are in our culture? Their spouse. Their spouse. That is a direct reflection of Christianity on a beta culture. Because in an ancient beta culture, you would never see your spouse as your friend. Why? Why? She can't protect you. Your wife can't protect you within a might makes right culture. If you have Smith and Wesson, right? Exactly. What has happened, there's two things that happen. Courtly love happened in Christianity, but also modern weaponry and modern law, technology has brought people equality because they can protect. There's lesser need for self-protection and individual protection, right? But that wasn't what drove it, guys. What drove it was Christianity, right? You don't hear about knights pining about other knights. The knights are pining for their damsel, for their lady, right? This is a way of Christianity moving the beta cultures into what we consider a moral and ethical culture, which I think is kind of cool. I mean, it's really neat, right? Do you really want a hairy, stinky guy to be your best friend and sleep next to you on the pallet, and your wife's like over here? Oh, I don't know. It's like, okay, I don't even want that image. But the Romans were different, and so they fought in this line, and this is what it says. So, in 16, the Stratetotes, the legionnaires, led Jesus away into the Aula. Okay, this is not it's not the palace, it's the A-U-L-E, which is literally the open yard. The Quad Barracks, open yard. Okay, and then it says yard. Then it says that is the Praetorium, literally Praetorium. The Praetorium is the Legion headquarters. And the way a Legion headquarters worked is this, and we know this because if you go back and look on the internet, you'll see Legion headquarters. And by the way, I described it in Centurion because this is a huge deal. The legions usually had a headquarters building, and the building usually had a gate in it. So when you talk about a gate into a legion headquarters, usually had a gate here and a gate here, and then you had your walls, and usually the barracks you kept the equus, the horses. You put the Deucerion, the horses of Deucerion, you put them away, usually downwind, away from the wind. But you put the other barracks over here, these are the barracks, and you might have a market, and you'd have the smithy, usually someplace between, also where the wind did not blow. And you had walls. If it were large enough, you might have practice areas in areas, but you always had an area within this where you could exercise the troops. And if you've ever seen military formation, right? You get into military formations with all your legions and stuff, and you want space to march them in and do stuff. So you basically would have an open space within it. And so the legion headquarters, now, in the Praetorium, in the Anatonian, Tower of Antonia, likely that was outside where, let me see if I can draw a picture. I don't know. Okay, here's, this is the temple. Here's the Anatolia. Probably Pilate was seeing them here in this court. So what they did is they brought Jesus likely into here where the quad was. And that was probably where they barracks, the barracks and other things. So they had an open area in the Tower of Antonia that was the quad. And that's what they call here the Praetorium. And it says, they souk kaleo. I think this is really cool. The word souk kaleo literally means to call together. Souk kaleo, they call together. Now, what other word means called together? What's that?
Ecclesia.
Ecclesia. Oh, I have it in there. Oh, I have it in there. I wrote it. I gave you a freebie, right? What's an ecclesia? Church. This is a word. It's not really church. The ecclesia is the Athenian democracy. Okay? But it's a word translated church. It means to what? Kaleo, together. Ek kaleo. Where this is souk kaleo. Now remember, I've told you, the Greeks have a gazillion words that mean, remember the word that Mark uses to call together the Sanhedrin? Basically means to shack up. Okay? He was making fun of them. It's interesting that the word used here, literally in the Greek, means to call together. But you notice the word that's chosen, right? Because an ecclesia is the Athenian democracy, and it means a group called together that are all equals, and also it doesn't have a leader. A souk kaleo, like a synagogue. The difference between a synagogue, by the way, souk kaleo and synagogue, you notice similarities? A synagogue is a group that is called together by a leader. And a souk kaleo is a group called together by leaders, by people, by group, by a leading person. As opposed to an ecclesia that is a peerless group that does not have a leader. Very interesting, isn't it? So, they souk kaleo, they call together the whole company of Spira. Literally not soldiers, but the cohort. The cohort. So, the word is Spira, which is this word that was used for Hippolytes, for a group of Hippolytes. So a cohort. But it's really interesting because it's not using Latin, it's using the Greek words. Not using Latin, it's using Greek words. So think about that. Think about what's happening here. So in other words, okay, the legionaries, the soldiers, led Jesus away into the open place to the quad of the barracks and called together the whole company, the cohort. And since it says cohort, this probably means that how many cohorts are there? One cohort. A cohort was 10 legions. So you have a legion with 10 cohorts, unless it is the primary, the head one, which was 6. But they were double legions.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. And so it was, who knows where it was. It may not have been in a thing of Anatolia, but it had to be close. Had to be pretty close. We don't know exactly where they barracks them, but they most likely barracks them. The legion was in the city of Jerusalem, because that was where it was safe. Good. So look what it says. In 17, they indidusko. They indidusko. Now, if you remember the Greek, the word for putting clothing on is not indidusko. Indidusko means literally to invest. And it says, they indidusko a porphyra. Porphyra is the name of the purple muscle, and also is the name of the color. And robe is added. It does not say robe. It says it does not say they clothed him. It says they invested a purple, a porphyra on him. Now, what do you think they put on Jesus? Number one, why would they not have a purple robe?
You don't have that
Expensive.
lying around.
Yeah, way too expensive. You don't just have a purple robe lying around. They're worth lots of big money. And the fact that this says porphyra means that this was a purple muscle. So what do you think they put on Jesus? Especially since they were used invested. Think about just a second, invested.
Okay.
Probably not a cape. That's
Dye? Maybe a dye? Liquid?
I wouldn't say a dye. What do we do? What are the vestments of the priests? Invested. They have a stole. A stole, yeah. I would guess, and we know this is true because we found them in, there are pictures. Go look at pictures. The Romans like to wear stoles, stole, on their himatians, on their robes. And the stoles would identify them as
Priests.
their position. Yeah, their positions. Because it was a lot easier to buy. Look, we think clothing is ubiquitous and everybody has it, right? Everybody's got, I bet you got a full closet of stuff and you're wondering what to do with it. I always get told you need to dump all, this old clothing. I'm like, why do I get rid of it? We all have gazillions of pieces of clothing, right? So the ancient world, they didn't. In the ancient world, they might have had one piece of clothing. Why was it a big deal when Robin Hood and Little John was granted, 10 sets of green, right, by the king? Because that was rare clothing, period, and it was clothing. If you had 2 robes, that's a big deal. If you had 1 robe, it was probably normative in the ancient world. And so therefore, if you had a couple of robes, one was out at the dry cleaners, and so you'd have your stole that would indicate your rank. See? In the second mission, I talk about how they decorated the robes, the himatians, that were used by the Greeks. And the Greeks were really happy. They had a lot of white stoles, basically wool white, but they would put like
Fringes.
fringes. Yeah, they had fringes and like embroidery around the fringe and around the top. This is one of their favorite things because they really liked the contrast. And so I would say the Romans weren't much different than that. They basically had probably yellow white type color, but then they would put stoles around them to indicate their positions and other things. So who gave them the stole? Pilate's the only guy who would have such a thing, and by the way, this would be normative. Why would Pilate not wear a purple robe?
He's not a king.
He's not royalty. He is a procurator. And look, the Romans, this is what I tell you, you got to be careful. Especially if you go in the ancient world, if you go back in time, do not just call them like togas. Call them by the proper name, or they'll say, where are you from? Because it's like Gucci's, right? You're wearing a Gucci, everybody's like, whoa, he's wearing a Gucci, right? If you're wearing a Himation, it's a Himation. You're wearing a stole, it's a stole. So Pilate gave them his stole. How many of them do you think he had? Maybe 1. It may have been given to him by the Senate in Rome to indicate his position. Now, I know this is not our worldview, our point of view, but what was Pilate thinking? What is Pilate doing?
Showing this guy's a king.
He is literally showing he's a king, and also what is he telling the soldiers? Now look what happens. They then they twisted, they literally pleco, a braid together, a crown, a Stephanos, a wreath of thorns, literally akantinos, a thorny robe, and they placed it on him. Now, this is still not very happy, but why were they really good at making wreaths? When I was a kid, I wondered this. You know, why would they make a wreath, and why would this be a big deal?
Well, didn't they in the
Victory?
Olympics, they always make a laurel wreath
Yeah.
around, you know, the winner.
Bingo! Bingo! That's correct. You know, that is right on. Matter of fact, every time a guy wins, what did you win when you won the Olympics?
The wreath.
The reed, and they weren't made of metal. You know, the Greeks gave you a laurel wreath made of real laurels. How long is that going to last?
Not try.
There's a reason why they did that. What was their point in giving you a laurel wreath, a wreath of that nature?
It's temporary.
It's temporary. Yeah, your victory won't last. Your strength won't last. You're going to die. This was their view of their life. Now, the Romans, what did the Romans give to their, if you read Centurion, you know, so you know the answer, but what did they give to their people as awards? They gave them metal laurel wreaths that had formed out of metal, out of silver and gold, to indicate rank and indicate awards. And that's what they wore. That was an award. So you could be awarded if you were the first troop over the wall, which is a dubious honor, okay? Because you may be dead, but if you survived, you might be awarded. And you give you an aureola, which was a wreath made of silver. If you were gallant in battle, you could get a wreath made of gold. Because the Romans saw this. Why was it a permanent thing with the Romans? What was permanent about a military victory? They couldn't take it away from you, right? Because it was forever. One was commemorating an act of, for example, in peacetime as an athletic event. The other one was commemorating an event when you defended your other troops, right? And your people that you were working with. It was a huge deal to them. And so they were really good at making these things. That's why they made one. And what does a thorn, what does this signify? What do you think a thorny laurel wreath of thorns signifies?
Same comes with authority.
Okay, if a laurel that's green signifies an athletic victory, then thorns would indicate pain and suffering. They're sending a message, and the message is cultural. Now, everybody in their culture, everybody Mark's writing to understands this immediately. A crown of thorns means he is being awarded why? What is his award? He's being punished for no reason. And Pilate, they're sending a message. The soldiers are sending a message. This isn't a hidden code. This isn't the biblical code. This is what real. This is real. And it's not, you know, we say in our worldview, this is what they're doing. What they're
making
torturing.
They're making fun of him. They're torturing him.
That's what the NIV says. The mockery of Jesus.
The mockery. Yeah. You don't mock somebody. Look, in the ancient world, you don't mock people by putting crowns on their head. What are you doing? You don't. You're awarding them. You don't mock people by putting a purple stole on them. You know, this is what they did to Jesus. What the Jewish guys did to Jesus. The Sanhedrin, when they were hitting him and then slapping him. That is truly a mockery. This is not mockery yet. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to say, if it's not mockery or whatever, then getting to verse 19, and they're striking him on the head and spitting.
Let's go there. This is a beautiful. I don't know how much time we have, but okay. In 18, they began to call out. They began to aspazomai. It's not call out. Literally, the word in the Greek means they enfolded him in their arms and said, "Hail!" And the word isn't hail. The word is chario. Grace, King of the Jews. Grace, King of the Jews. Okay, number one, you know, I hate the way we translate in our culture, because the word is the same word that was used when the angel came to Mary and said, chario, grace. And we translate it, hail. This is the same word, chario, grace. In our culture, grace means what? In our Christian culture, grace is what?
Blessing.
The highest blessing. I keep telling you, we got to be cautious. We may have mistaken the word and misused the word grace. You're using the same word as the soldiers are to Jesus. Now, either the soldiers are being very positive, or grace is not as positive as you think it is in the context you're using it.
Or is sarcasm.
Or are they not?
Or it's sarcasm. But look what the word is. The word, it says, they began to aspezomai, to unfold in the arms. What does that mean? It's not the same word as used to be a wrestler hold. So it may, you know, it could mean that maybe they're going and crunching him. But that's not the word. The word literally means to, okay, if it's call out, which it's not, that's not what the word means. Literally, when you aspezomai someone, you greet them with a hug. This literally is saying they're greeting them with a hug and saying chario. Chario in Greek means hi.
Ciao.
Ciao. It's the
But
same
then
as
it
ciao.
goes on to other things.
But then it goes on to other things. And they, in 19, then they tupto, repeated blows on the head with a, not a staff. It's a kalamos. What's a kalamos? A kalamos is a reed. It's a reed. The word is mistranslated intentionally. I don't know why they did that, but it is not a staff. It was a staff, they would say staff. A staff would be specifically a centurion or a under officer's stick. It does not say that. It says they repeatedly hit him with a reed.
That doesn't seem very harsh. I don't know.
They put purple on him. They crowned him. Pilate was sending a message to his soldiers. They hit him with a reed. Do you know what this is called, right? It is called symbolic punishment. It is done in many cultures. Symbolic punishment is when you have someone that is a very high level, like a king or a royalty or a duke, and you intend to punish them severely, but you do not punish them severely in the sense of an actual full punishment. What you're doing is you are defaming them. This is called defaming, and it's very culturally based. We'll talk about this next week. But it's the words, like I said, do not support what a lot of the translation says here. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.